Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webcast, Internet of Things from Big Data to Smart Data, episode 3 of 8. My name is Megan Walker, and I'm a communities coordinator here at ASUG. Before we start today's webcast, I'm going to briefly go over some promotional material that may interest you. The first of which is the SAP Analytics and Business Objects Conference, which you may know as SABOC. Will be held in Austin, Texas from August 31st to September 2nd. To learn more about this, please visit saboc.asug.com. Concurrently, we'll be hosting the Business One ASUG Summit in Austin from August 31st to September 2nd. For more information on this event, please visit B1, letter B, the number 1.asug.com. Finally, ASUG is pleased to remind you that those of you who are interested in human resources, the ASUG HR SIG is welcoming SuccessFactors only customers at a special introductory rate. For more information on the HR SIG, please check out our refreshed community page on asug.com. Today's webcast will be recorded. The recording and the slides will be posted to ASUG's website later today, and all the registrants will receive an email with a link to these materials. If you have any questions during the webcast, please add them to the Q&A box that you should see at the left-hand side of your screen. If you collapse the box during the presentation, you can expand it using the red Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And now I'd like to turn it over to Paul Cortina, the SME of the Internet of Things for ASUG. Paul?
Thank you. And welcome, everyone, and welcome to episode number 3 of our 8-part webcast series. We've had some great webcasts so far, and the trend will continue with today's webcast. All these webcasts, as Megan mentioned, are being recorded, and we're actually doing blogs on the webcast that will also be featured on blogs.sap.com and ASUG News. So stay tuned for more information on that. And one thing I would like to really encourage people to do, at the end of the webcast, we're going to ask you for some feedback in the form of polling questions. And we'd really like to know, one, in terms of what was one key point or one key message or one key takeaway you got out of today's webcast. And second, what is something else that you still would like to know or be expanded on further in terms of future topics? We're just starting to grow our ASUG IoT community and really look forward to input from you as we look and drive content that is of interest to you, our ASUG members. And one other thing I'd like to highlight, coming up in Chicago later on this month, June 23rd to 25th, is the SAP Manufacturing Forum. There'll be both IoT and Industry 4.0 content, among other subjects covered at the event. I'll be attending it. Michael Lynch will be attending it from SAP. So if you're in a number of the given industries mentioned, I hope from a customer side that you can attend. And without further ado, I would like to introduce today's speaker, David Parker, a very good friend of mine with SAP. And David's going to talk to you today, very interesting topic in the context of IoT, as it's titled From Big Data to Smart Data. And David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Paul. And just like to extend my welcome to all of you on the call here. As Paul has mentioned, we're going to start focusing now on smart data in the relationship to big data and IoT. From an SAP perspective, we've been focusing on this area for many, many years now. It's not necessarily new to SAP or to most other vendors. And specifically when you look at it in the context of the journey of data and moving towards a data-driven enterprise. So the first slide I have up here, I think most of you will be very, very familiar with in terms of looking at the journey of we've all gone through on analyzing raw data and turning that data into information and ultimately advanced analytics. I'm not going to talk through each and every point here. I think we get the general theme of what this slide is articulating, which is back in the early 90s. We started off with our own personal computers. I remember the days where laptops were more like desktop machines. They weren't really that portable. Getting onto the internet was somewhat of a challenge. I remember the days of dial-up and 56K speed that we were getting. We were all very lucky to at least get a web browser to appear, and to do any type of search in that browser would take 2 to 3 minutes. It's a completely different world that we live in today. I think for any of you that are using the internet today, which I'm sure all of you are, to run any type of internet search, you're expecting that result set to come back in a matter of sub-seconds. So we look at the evolution of data, running it through from not just the content, but to the B2B, business to business, the business to consumer, how consumers relate to data, how it relates to social media data and having that data available on mobile devices. We've seen the rise of Instagram. We've seen the rise even further of streaming technologies such as Netflix, moving from the DVD or physical device actually to media now being displayed across the internet. Into more recent times of the cloud, making it easy to consume and conduce that information to the end consumer, the likes of you and I that do our own personal shopping on a day-to-day basis on e-commerce sites. We actually do our research first before we even contemplate going into a store. So the elements of taking all of this data has fundamentally changed how we interact in the world and society today, and that's kind of where I'm going to have most of my focus, because basically what's changed is that we now have more connected devices available to us. So I think we've all seen the stats that there's more mobile devices in a common average home than there are toothbrushes, as an example. Right, so devices are getting more and more connected. Well, I'll share some stats on that with you momentarily. And we're seeing that processes have to be connected as well from a work perspective in terms of people, workflow, and process. How do I get connected mobility into a connected enterprise, into connected cities, connected energy? This is kind of the new terms that we're now seeing in the world of the Internet of Things. How do we actually use data to drive our business, drive business outcome? And then the other advantages that we see with this data being connected is that it actually leads to healthcare. How do we improve our own personal lives? Again, we've seen the rise of Fitbits that we wear on our wrists, the actual Apple Watches that we see, and soon to be delivered Google Watches and so on. How do we as human beings interact with that data? How do we actually make that data more intelligent for us that we can make better, smarter decisions on how we drive our business? But there's a number of things that we need to consider first. First, I think we all get this, that data volumes have increased as well as the data types. This has fundamentally changed the landscape that we knew several years ago. Even it's changed the landscape of what we knew yesterday. There's all types of different data that's available on the market. There's social data, weather data, CRM data, machine data, and the list goes on. But the main emphasis here is what do we do with that data, because data on its own is not that important. It's basically how we take that data, how we manage it, how we analyze it, and ultimately how we use that data. Again, think of the theme here, taking big data and making that data smart, making it more intelligent for advanced analytics, and again, giving us empowerment on how we can run our businesses. Before we can understand that data, we have to overcome a number of challenges, a number of hurdles, and I've highlighted 3 here. The first of which is complexity. So with complexity, we have, again, we can look at all the various stats that are out there on the market. These are just some average stats that we've taken from a number of the industry analysts that are out there. So if you look at the first stat here in terms of connected people, as many as 2.5 billion on social networks by the year 2020. And again, if we'd spoke a decade ago, certainly 2 decades ago, we'd never imagined that we'd actually have a connected network where we could commune with one another on social media, whether that was Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You know, these things weren't even dreamt of back then, but they're part of today's life and part of today's society on how we drive our interaction with one another. Then we've seen the rise of the Internet of Things, connected devices. I spoke earlier about more mobile devices in the average home there are toothbrushes. That extends to home appliances. It extends to washing machines. It extends to coffee machines. It extends to the thermostat in your home, the garage opener for your home. All these things are now being connected. And again, industry stats are telling us this will be as many as 75 billion. I've seen even higher quotes of 90 billion devices connected by the year 2020. And then we have to look at that in the terms of global trade and global business. $65 trillion increase by the year of 2020. Now, with all of that brings complexity. With all of that brings us a new unknown of how we have to deal with that data. Again, taking raw data and turning that into information, making it smart. And what enterprises are looking for today is a data-driven approach, getting the data to work for them with minimal human intervention, getting it more automated. What we're hearing from the customer base and the market as a whole is that data is the new gold mine. It's the new formal currency for trading. If I can get instant access to data to let me understand how my business is performing, then maybe I can outperform and outmaneuver my competitors and get very, very focused on my new business strategy. So with that, I can actually look at the entire set of that data, the complete set of that data. And what I mean by that is that typically to get data in its entirety, we would previously have to pre-aggregate, pre-filter that data, look at pieces of that data. And again, just to re-quote the common phrase here is that, the devil's in the detail, and often we would miss that. We would miss the low-level granularity of data because it would have been too costly to store all of that data, and we couldn't process all that data quick enough, which is why we went through the elements of having raw data turned into batch data, turned into overnight runs of that data to be aggregated, filtered, and then put into the lines of business the following day. Well, businesses don't operate like that today. They operate in microseconds. The dynamics of the market today changes instantly, and businesses have to be able to react to those dynamic changes in real time. So we have to move to more of a real-time enterprise driven by data. We have to be more responsive across that enterprise. So we're seeing things like smarter products. I mentioned before about home appliances, your washing machine, your coffee maker, your thermostat. Having your production line being more resilient because you now have access to this real-time data. You're now being informed at the lowest level of granularity on how a specific machine or device is performing and understand its health state. So you can then predetermine whether it needs to have some preventive maintenance done to it before the actual equipment fails. So all these things add up to an enriched data-driven enterprise, but it also has its challenges on how we handle that. And then lastly here, I've actually put out the third challenge as being the digital enterprise, a digital economy. I think we've all heard of a digital currency called Bitcoin when that was launched several years ago, and it's still very prominent in the financial trading industry today. But again, just quoting some of these stats here, 3 billion new customers, new consumers across the globe. That's happening today. 10 to 20 trillion means the impact of IT. IT is an evolution stroke revolution. It's constantly changing. When we look at Moore's law here, there's an infinite amount that we can do with much more advanced technology, much more than what we've ever previously done. The costs of in-memory solutions are dropping radically on a day-by-day basis, which enables us to pick up this concept of having a sensor fitted to absolutely everything. And the way to look at this is that even we as human beings almost become robotic to an extent. We almost become a device in our own right, particularly if we're wearing like a digital watch, if we're wearing a Fitbit device, if we're wearing Bluetooth headphones and it can connect through to a Wi-Fi environment. That in itself allows us to be connected so that we can be personalized and targeted in how we actually engage and simplify the consumer experience. But again, it adds to the complexity and it adds to how we manage the raw data into smart data. We have to be able to overcome all of these challenges. Any enterprise does, whether they're small, medium, or whether they're large global institutions. You have to be able to understand that data. You have to be able to manage it. So from an SAP perspective, we've actually broken it down into these three categorizations of the Internet of Things, which is essentially connecting information, people, and things. I mentioned before about the Internet of Content, getting back to Google searches, information on the web, finding out where your nearest golf course is, where you want to take your next vacation, do you need to book hotel, car, and flight with that. All of that information is at our fingertips, available on any mobile device, anytime, anywhere. Then we have the Internet of People. How do I know I've got the right talent on board, conducting the processes of workflow I need to do across the organization? Has the right skill sets to operate highly sophisticated machinery, either on a production line or out in the field in terms of services? How do I know from a system integrator standpoint I have the right level of business skills, industry-led business skills for my group of consultants? What's my run rate for my consultants? How do I communicate from a personal standpoint? Again, getting back to social media with the likes of Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and so on. And then we have the new rise of the Internet of Things, where, as I said earlier, everything and anything can be connected and will be connected. That is the goal. That's what we're seeing in the market today. So we're seeing this convergence of physical assets into digital assets to give us this new networked economy, this new digital economy, and the combining of those two paradigms, which ultimately allows us to look at this from an ideation through to performance. So how do I look at this raw data, and how do I determine what new business outcomes, new business strategies do I need to drive? Well, it's actually the convergence of all these data sets coming together. Social, mobile, cloud, and just generic information that I've always had available to me, but not necessarily at the right time. I have the human influence in terms of the social data. I have the pervasive access, which is on any mobile device, or that's a handheld tablet, whether it's a smartphone, etc. All that information, again, is available at my fingertips. More importantly, I have to look at how I access that information. It needs to be seamless. It needs to be integrated. And that's where we're seeing software as a service have a huge role to play. Now, again, when you look at streaming data like Netflix, that's software as a service. We look at iTunes, software as a service, allowing us as the consumers to interact with information and data at the point when we need it. And all of this has a big data context around it, because the tsunami of data that's going to hit us, and as of today, is in us today, with a huge volume of data that's exploding on a minute-by-minute basis. To actually deal with this, you have to have a very robust environment that creates a connected environment of the real-world operational technology with the business world, which is information technology. And this is the OT, IT convergence that you may have heard of that's approaching the Internet of Things. That data has to be combined on a single platform, a real-time data platform that allows you to evaluate big data in an instant. And again, that data can come from anywhere. It could be weather data, could be point-of-sale data, could be information data coming from your CRM, who are your customers, when the last time they purchased. It could be from your asset management platform, looking at the products and devices you have on your manufacturing floor. When's the last time you purchased new equipment? What's the resale value? What's the value of that asset if it needs repairing? What's the service level agreement of that asset? All of these combined together allows you to look at the raw data, aggregate that raw data, manage that raw data, and ultimately turn it into useful information, which allows you to be much more smarter about your business. So with that, we have to look at the innovation areas. As I mentioned before, we're no longer in this mode of running in batch. There are some firms that are still running batch due to some legacy environments they have, which they need to maintain, but rest assured, they are transitioning from batch to real time. They have to now look at data as it's being generated from either the machine, either from the business, or basically from the markets as a whole. They have to analyze that data to predict. And then ultimately, you want to have that available to you on a world-class user experience portal that's available to you at any time, anywhere, on any device. But before we get into this a little bit more, I want to take you back into what we mean by smart information. Again, for those of you that are familiar with the life cycle of data and understanding the transition of raw data into information into knowledge, and then knowledge into empowerment, we've moved from this pervasive environment where it was more reactive as opposed to proactive on what happened, which is what you see on the left-hand side in orange here. The conventional days of MOLAP, OLAP, and ROLAP, where we would pull information into a star schema, we'd aggregate that data up and then create cubes of information, and then it becomes, in my terminology, an ice cube. The value of that information in the cube devalues over a period of time because the business is constantly running new data. You have to move into an environment where not only do you understand what happened, but why did it happen? If it's something that's good, well, how do I repeat it? If it's something that's bad, how do I prevent it from happening again? And that's where we look at, well, what will happen? Start getting more predictive. You do predictive libraries, predictive modeling. Then moving that into being prescriptive. So once I'm able to predict at a group level, well, how can I tailor that to an individual? Specifically when I'm doing precision target marketing. How do I know I can send a real-time offer out to an individual because they've just purchased the latest product from me and actually want to give them a 10% discount voucher to buy more of the same product at a future point in time? How can I prescribe that level of intelligence and analytics to that individual? So we've moved from standard business intelligence right through from advanced business intelligence and advanced analytics through to what I'd term as smart analytics, utilizing smart data, utilizing real-time data. And I touched on this earlier in the context that technology has yielded these new business benefits. The technology advances that we've seen in the past decade or even the past year has allowed us to be more authoritative and more demanding of the data. I think that the days are long gone where the business has been restricted by the limitations of the technology solutions and capabilities. I think it's completely turned on its head where the business can actually go into thinking about the art of the possible, running different what-if scenarios. So looking at the age of where we now run more data in memory, computer power is getting more and more highly sophisticated, more performant. We're getting information in real time. The availability of the data is now at the fingertips at the point when it's being generated, not at the point where it's 2 or 3 days late. That allows us to start to predict outcomes. We can leverage streaming technology, streaming data, run complex analytics on that data before it gets stored anywhere. We can look at mass and rapid experimentation with that data, run what-if scenarios and simulations with that data. Different business models and business outcomes can be simulated in real time and have an impact on the business in real time. I have all of that at my fingertips, and that's because of the innovations around technology. So businesses have the ability now to look at data in the context of what if, the art of the possible. And again, I'm not going to focus too much on each one of these segments here, but suffice to say it goes across every single industry you can think of, whether it's manufacturing, retail, CPG, healthcare, even into sports, telcos, financial services. It touches every aspect of how we live our lives today. Again, let's focus on banking as an example. I think many years ago we were using the common average check to make payments. And yet it will take 3 to 7 days, depending on your banking institution, for that check to clear through your account. I think all of us will be utterly astonished today if somebody wants to send me a payment that I have to wait 3 to 5 days for a check to clear. I can do it instantaneously just on an application on my mobile device. And within a matter of minutes, it's credited into the recipient's account. That's the advantages of taking that kind of the smart data element and putting it to good use, putting it into an area where I'm actually providing more business benefit. Take brand sentiment as another example. If I understand consumer persona by taking in social media data, how are they tweeting and chatting on the social media networks about how my product's performing or how it's not performing, can I streamline that information into my production line to improve my product quality, improve the effectiveness of my product? And there's many other facets here as we go through these lines of business and we go through the industries per line of business. Every single line of business manager now has this smart data at their fingertips because we're able to converge all of the different big data asset types and artifacts, as I mentioned earlier. Now, this enables us to think the art of the possible, think about new business initiatives, and ultimately drive new business value. And what that means across the line of business is that I can start to run predictive calculations. I can start to look at this data, again, as it's being generated, run predictive libraries, run statistical analytics, mathematical analytics, and as you see in the chart in front of you here, we have 90% of the line of businesses are now running in this mode. But many of them are low in skill set. They're not PhD mathematicians, but they are able to look at this data in a new way. They're able to analyze this raw data, this big data, in a completely different way to what they used to before. And then it moves into the business analysts, where there's a medium understanding of what to do with that data. That they've seen these data patterns before, they know what the business outcomes are from these data patterns, and they can ultimately make decisions on that data because they understand the data itself. And then you have the high usage of predictive analytics with the new breed of data science. And I think this slide's a little bit old now because it's way above the 0.1% that you see here. Every institution has some idea of data science, and most institutions have data science consultants or analysts working for them to rip through that data, picking out the signals from all the noise of that big data and turning that data to smart data. So there's an element of advanced analytics here with predictive analytics libraries that SAP has, with its integration into third-party libraries such as R, its robust modeling predictive platform, which is called Infinite Insights, part of our KXN acquisition, that allows us to do rapid deployments. It allows us to apply this 80 to 20% rule, being that 80% of the time we can take base functionality of our existing products, take your raw data, run them through these models, these statistical algorithms, and come up with something that's close to renewed business outcome. Then we'd use the other 20% for tweaking that environment, those models, that gives you, the consumer, the customer, specific advantage against your competitors. So you're now getting into intellectual property that you now own, and you've become more sophisticated, more advanced, because you can run new business outcomes. You can change dynamically the way that you go to market with your products, with your solutions, and ultimately how you run your business, how you look at the entire production workflow of your business and change processes that will optimize your business and therefore help you to reduce costs. And we've seen consumers take that on into a completely different way. Consumers now are looking at data in different forms. And this slide you see here will not be new to you. This is how we all interact in the society today. It's a new echelon of customers that we have, the new millenniums. You know, if I talk to any youngster today and tell them you have to go and get a 2,400-foot magnetic reel tape, load it up onto a tape reader in a big data center, before I can tell you what your bank balance is, they'd be utterly flabbergasted with that statement. They have no idea of what that means. Because to them, the mobile device, a laptop, an iPad, Android, etc., the information is there for them digitally. They can communicate with one another socially on the social networks that are available. You know, you've got Snapchat and WhatsApp and Snap and so on. All of these are different tools that have been generated as software as a service. So they're highly informed. They know what they're looking for. They know how they want to shop. They know what they want to buy. When they're online, they can analyze and do price comparisons to determine where they can get the best deal from. Now, the retailers have to be in tune to that because the business landscape has completely been transformed. They no longer can accept the process of a consumer walking into a high street store and spending 15 to 20 minutes browsing to look for something. More likely than not, the average consumer would have done their research online. So that average consumer has changed, but the objectives of the retailer has remained the same. They still want to provide seamless customer experience, deliver optimal offers based upon the right product at the right time at the right price. They also want to improve sales and sales effectiveness and do upsell and cross-sell. All of these objectives hasn't changed from the retailer, but the way in which their products are being consumed by the consumer has radically changed. So they therefore need to look at their businesses and adapt their businesses to that process whilst trying to meet the same outcomes and the same objectives, but ultimately look to change the paradigm and how they create new objectives, new ways of improving revenue and reducing costs, and ultimately improving their operating profit margins, because that's what firms are looking for. But they first have to understand how they go through that transition, that there's kind of a little bit of a wake-up call that they have to go through in terms of realizing this. They have to look at continuous intelligence by analyzing data on the fly, moving from batch to real time. They have to be proactive in their detection. It's no longer acceptable to look at data that's 2 days old or 2 months old unless you're doing some kind of pattern detection and correlation with historical data to real-time data. You have to have an integrated business plan that not only looks at your business, but looks at the operational side. Again, this is the IT-OT convergence I spoke of earlier. And you have to set your business up to deal with automated responses, i.e., automated real-time offer management in real time, automated predictive maintenance in manufacturing and in oil and gas to reduce downtime on the production line, whether that's oil and gas, whether it's energy, whether it's mining. And all of this information has to be readily available, smart information readily available on any device. So I have to be connected. I have to have social media involved. I have to have weather data involved. I have to have point-of-sale data, e-commerce data, machine data. Again, all the elements that big data stands for. So think of the 3 V's of big data: volume, variety, velocity, and ultimately the 4th one, which is more important, which is the value. That value is now turning into being smart value. How do I utilize that data to make my business be more productive and be more efficient and become more optimized? In the words of SAP, how do I make it run simple? So from SAP standpoint, we're all about enabling technology from the edge to the core. And if you've listened to the previous sessions as part of this series, I'm sure my colleagues will have spoke to you about edge devices. We have the capability of processing data on the edge, turning that data into smart intelligence data, and more importantly, having that data be converged for contextualization and harmonization with things like ERP data, line of business data, which is what we call the core. So having flexibility at the edge with robust communications, having operational analytics, pattern detection, predictive service, geospatial analytics, graphical representative relationship modeling capabilities, high-speed calculations for doing analytics and transactional processing on the fly. All of that leads to how I can change my workflow, how I can change the models that I process my data through, how I run my business to ultimately simplify my business. Now, it's not just about saying this is what needs to be done. We truly believe that we have a platform that enables us to do that. And that is done in harmony with S/4HANA. And I don't think any presentation would be complete without talking about going beyond the core and embracing the new digital economy, which is one of the core reasons that we came up with S/4HANA, which is obviously the flagship products from SAP, now running on the SAP HANA Cloud platform. Again, moving from batch to real time, moving from this big data environment to smart data, incorporating the new world of the digital economy, the big data, the Internet of Things data, social networks, people, and turning that into digital information. How can I close my books earlier than I would do to give me a competitive advantage across my various lines of business, but also to external competition? How do I speed up that process? And smart financials is just one element of that. So this isn't meant to be a Suite for HANA presentation, but it's important to understand that this is pivotal to how we move from this world of raw data to smart data in terms of taking your big data with your e-commerce data and your books and records data, which would ultimately sit on the business suite of SAP, merging that data to set together that enables you to drive more smarter, wiser analytics. And the way we've approached that is on the various lines of business and with our industry cloud solutions. And again, I'm not going to go through each of the bullets on this slide, but just talk at the high level of the IoT, OT convergence, which I mentioned before. This is where we're seeing a lot of the use cases around the Internet of Things. Again, the ability to merge those two very disparate data sets, which once would never previously talk to each other until many days, weeks, or even months after the fact. We're now doing all of that in real time. That enables us to do things like precision farming and doing things like asset intelligent network, precision farming to the extent of knowing when to fertilize a field and when to harvest crop based upon weather conditions, based upon irrigation. Is the field irrigated? It has enough water supplies? Has it had enough fertilizer to actually do any planting from a farming standpoint? Is the machinery up to speed? Does it need servicing? And this is where the asset intelligent network comes into play, because I can monitor each and every piece of my asset in real time based upon sensors on that asset. I can look at the workforce that's manning those machines in real time from a talent perspective, skill perspective, replenishment of resources when people are out sick or take vacation. How do I make sure that I'm having the same high degree of skills operating highly sophisticated machines? And then I have the procurement side in terms of business to business, understanding procurement to pay, the invoice settlement side of things, all done in real time. And we have a very robust business network at SAP called Ariba that is augmented with things like Hybris. It's augmented even further with mobility solutions from Cyclo. And then when you add that together with tools from SuccessFactors in terms of HCM, human capital management, and talent management, we have a full ecosystem that we can bring to bear with the suite running in the cloud, S4HANA, and combining that kind of operational technology with informational technology that we get from the suite. So that's a truly powerful environment. And I just thought I'd put this slide up here just to show you all the different elements of looking at the various industries. When we look at energy, natural resources as one kind of industry sector, but touching many verticals in oil and gas, mining, utilities, manufacturing. Again, I know we're kind of running a little bit tight on time, so I may rush through these next couple of slides relatively quickly because I want to talk through some use case examples as well. But ultimately, from that first slide there, I have to look at the trends in the energy and natural resources environments and industries, and looking at the digitalization of the business, the large aging workforce, and how do I take their knowledge, their brain assets, if you will, and actually get those automated? How can I look at sustainability, which is huge on everybody's agenda, particularly in manufacturing and natural resources and reutilization of energy? How do I get more green? How do I get more smarter? And how do I strive for efficiency? These are kind of the fundamental tenets that we're seeing across multiple industries. How do I get cheaper, faster, and smarter? Utilizing data that I've had in my business previously and utilizing new data artifacts from the world of big data. And as you see that in this next slide, there are various building blocks I have to consider, particularly when looking at asset health, particularly when looking at the health state of a piece of machinery and any assets across my enterprise. And don't forget, assets can be anything from a telephone sitting on your desk in your office, right through to a combine harvester out in a farming field, right through to a smart meter reader in utilities. I have to understand the asset itself, and by that I'm utilizing sensor information, the Internet of Things information, putting that in real time, looking at its health state, its integrity, its performance levels, when does it need to be serviced, when was its last service, what's its failure rate look like, right through to understanding these analytics at a high level. and defining from that what I need to do from a predictive maintenance with that asset, whether I should repair or replace. What does it mean by that in terms of the depreciation of that asset as it relates to my financial accounting records for that asset? And again, this is all being driven from the raw data coming from the device itself, but it's now real time. It's not batch. It's operating at a much lower level of granularity. So with that, I'm going to turn my attention to a couple of use cases. You'll see here I have three. I may only just talk to a couple of them to allow some time for Q&A. First one I'll pick on is Tennant. So those of you that aren't aware who Tennant is, it's one of the largest manufacturers of cleaning machinery across the globe. It's been a long-standing customer and partner of SAP. So to give you an example, for those of you that are walking through an airport, or if you're walking through a train station, you see the circular cleaning equipment. It's likely to be a Tennant cleaning machine. And their whole idea was to actually, how do they become a $1 billion enterprise over a short period of time? So they invented this new technology called Enriched technology, utilizing SAP connected logistics and preventive maintenance solutions, more so on the preventive maintenance side, to understand how they can reduce operating costs from the point of creating, manufacturing the machine to the point of deploying that machine out on a consumer, customer's environment, reduce the time and the use of consumables. So cleaning supplies, how can they make their equipment more efficient to make sure they don't use more cleaning fluids, but become more optimal? How can they locate lost assets? Believe it or not, there's a high propensity for assets to go missing, particularly when you look at hospitals and hand sanitizing equipment and so on, floor cleaning equipment. These tend to move from ward to ward, and therefore they don't have any tracking of them because they weren't being fitted with sensors. And they would move from one hospital ward, even from one hospital to another, without actually being understood where that asset resides. So now they can track all of that in real time. They now have visibility in real time as to whether machines are being abused by its operator. Whether that operator, getting back to what I said earlier about human resources and talent management, whether that operator is even skilled to use that particular piece of machinery. What type of training do they need? And this all adds up into the service level agreements that they have and insurance plans that they have when they actually sell or lease, rent these pieces of equipment to their consumers. They can actually look at a leasing model that switches from a capital expenditure to an operating expenditure, knowing that they can track these pieces of equipment in real time and can actually analyze the use of these pieces of equipment in real time. So we actually put this solution together with a couple of partners. One was called ILS, that does with inventory management, using some of the product lifecycle management capabilities of SAP, and also with a company called DSI that allows us to use the network capability on actually capturing the information from the sensors themselves and transmitting it out across a network bridge that ultimately feeds directly into the predictive maintenance application that runs in the SAP HANA Cloud for the Internet of Things. The second one here is based upon Pirelli. I'll just touch on this one briefly in terms of adding sensors to the tires. Making sure that for transportation of tractor trailers that have perishable goods on board, that you can monitor the state of the tire, the wear and tear of that tire, and predict failures before they occur. So again, the smart data will allow the drivers to divert directly to a repair center before having a blowout and therefore causing more downtime in transportation of perishable goods. And then finally, Alliander. Again, an energy management organization throughout Europe, one of the largest in Europe. Again, utilizing our predictive maintenance solution in the SAP HANA Cloud, has real-time spatial information for tracking of assets, understanding sustainability in terms of their green environment for solar-powered energy that feeds multiple energy grids across the whole of Europe, and then enable many of their products that they have out in the field become smart. I putting sensors onto those devices that provide them with real-time information that allows them to do energy grid optimization, redirection of energy to individual homes based upon the utilization with that region within that sector. So highly capable technology here, all being driven by the SAP HANA Cloud. And I'll finish up on that slide there and pause for a second to see if you want to go into questions at this point in time, Paul. I think we have roughly about 10, 15 minutes remaining to take some questions on board. So I'll hand back to you at this point, Paul, and see if we have any questions or if you want to go on to the poll.
Sure. Thank you. And reminder, people, use the Q&A area of the service to post your questions. And as a reminder as well, Megan will put up a couple of polling questions and really would appreciate your input. One, what was a key piece of information or learning takeaway from this session? And two, what are the things would you like to hear about in future sessions? So David, I have a couple of questions here as we're waiting for more to queue up. Has IoT replaced big data as a key focus for organizations today?
No, I think it's a combination of the two, Paul. So for those of you that are familiar with big data, big data was out there looking for a problem to solve. I mean, we've had big data for many, many years, and I believe, and SAP believes, that IoT is just a segment of big data. So if you look at IoT as being machine-to-machine data, machine learning, machine automation, it's now taking that data as another data asset to feed alongside all the other elements of big data, as I mentioned throughout the course of the presentation, such as social media data, weather data, e-commerce data, point-of-sale data, standard P&L, profit and loss data, books and records data. It's merging that data asset together as part of the big data umbrella, if you will. So it's right on top of the agenda for most enterprises and organizations that we deal with, and they're looking at it as a combined effort, not in isolation.
Great. And just a reminder, use the chat for questions. Here's another one. Are the LB managers the main instigators driving change? And is it core to executive management strategy?
Well, firstly, I'll point out that executives have three core goals that they all strive for when they look at their multi-year strategy, which is ultimately cost. How do I reduce cost? Number one. Number two is revenue. How do I improve revenue? And then number three is operating profit margin. How do I maximize that by taking a firm grip and hold on the first two objectives? Now, when they push that down to the lines of businesses now have to understand, look at this new enriched set of data that I have access to. How can I transform my business? And again, when we look at it from SAP Internet of Things, we talk about connect, transform, and reimagine. So once I've transformed my business, how can I reimagine that to help drive those basic three goals from my executives? So the executives kind of lead the charge, the CXOs lead the charge, but they have a high reliance on the lines of business coming up with new ways on how to drive the business going forward. And many of them see this new emergence of the Internet of Things of a principal driver to help them do that. I think the challenges that they have is, well, how do they get started? What are the use cases they should be involved in, and ultimately, what's the ROI? You know, if you want to put up this investment, what's my return on that investment before I start? And those are the areas that they approach SAP with to get more detailed help.
Great, thanks. Here's another question. How do you justify the upfront investment and calculate ROI?
Yeah, it's as I've just touched on. At SAP, we kind of use a methodology known as design thinking. So the first thing that we talk to our customer base about is use cases that we've seen in their industry, at their line of business, as it relates to how they want to drive new initiatives, new business outcomes. We engage with our industry value engineer team, which is a set of business consultants that we have internally. We also engage with our data scientist team. We'll take a subset of their data, analyze that data, and then come up with hypotheticals in terms of the art of the possible in this particular use case would generate this amount of investment and will ultimately generate this amount of return. And then we map that into a cross-functional matrix, which is basically looking at the industry, looking at their specific role in that industry in terms of the products and services that they provide, and figure out what's the low-hanging fruit that you can get immediate return on your investment, but it may not be a high growth yield for you in years ahead. And then the other end of the spectrum of that matrix is the high yield growth, but will take you quite a while to get there. And it's not that these things take months. We do these kind of sessions in a matter of days, straight weeks. So organizations can very quickly understand what are the use cases, how is it applicable to their business, how do we take those use cases and tweak them to give them competitive edge, and then ultimately how does that drive more revenue for them with minimal investment to begin with, and then they can ramp that investment up over time as they start to see new revenue models appear.
Great. Another question came in. What is the profile of companies going on IoT initiatives? I think that's more sense.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I did have that slide that spoke about industries and line of businesses, and SAP operates in 25 industries, 25 industries. And the profile of customer is from all walks of life, if you will. It's coming from manufacturing tends to be the first instigator. One of the reasons for that is that we have an initiative over in Europe, specifically Germany, around Industry 4.0, which is digitalization of the kind of the industrial internet, if you will. Having manufacturing firms not only digitalize their production plants, but also consumer appliances and products that they push out into the overall market. That's been one of the main drivers for manufacturing. But we're also seeing it in sport. NFL is a big user of sensorized devices that are fitted onto the players, and you can track player stats and analytics in real time. We're seeing that in motor racing. We're seeing it in retail. We're seeing it in consumer products, goods, oil and gas, mining. So there's a proliferation of IoT across every single industry, but we see more of an uptake on things like asset health and predictive maintenance, which is more aligned to manufacturing utilities. And those are kind of the main two. And then closer behind those will be areas such as mining, retail, automotive, and so on.
It's interesting. You mentioned automotive and mining. The reality is assets today are just becoming automatically equipped with, hundreds or thousands of sensors in a number of cases. So that information is actually being readily made available, almost whether the companies like it or not. Take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. And just go back to the very rudimentary things. We've all been in a car and seen the fuel gauge on a car. Right, so the fuel gauge has a sensor linked to the fuel tank, right? So you get to something as basic as that. The automotive manufacturer have obviously said, well, what if we could actually utilize that information to provide us with real-side insights as to how that person's driving the car? Do they always put their foot to the floor on the throttle of that car? And that gives rise to more maintenance problems with the car. I've got sensors on the brake pads of that car to determine brake wear. Well, how is that person braking on the car? So, again, to your point, Paul, that these are kind of data assets or artifacts that have been around for many a year, but it's now how can you utilize that data in the context of business data to drive new business value and drive new business outcome. And that's where we're seeing these industries now, again, because of some of the advances in technology, that they can process at a much faster rate and therefore take greater advantage of how they analyze and make use of that data to do things like predictive maintenance on cars, to do things like letting the driver know where he's most likely to find a parking spot in a garage that he normally frequents on a weekend when he does his retail shopping, and ultimately allow him to get free loyalty points rewards for parking in that garage, that he can actually use a token to go and get a free Starbucks every month. Those are the things that we're seeing automotive companies align with oil and gas companies to provide those promotional opportunities to get more prescriptive around the analytics for the end consumer.
Great. So, David, in terms of, just in wrapping up here, in terms of, is there one closing thought you'd like to leave this group with?
Yeah, the closing thought is this. When you look at data, then it all boils down to data. When it's big data or smart data or Internet of Things or Suite on HANA, it all boils down to data. So my parting thought for you is consider data in your own personal lives. What do you do with data? How do you consume data? How do you make data work for you? Because guaranteed, whatever you think from your own personal concept in terms of how you do your weekly grocery shopping to how you do your retail shopping, how do you buy your next car, how do you determine where to take that car in for a service, we as the vendors and the suppliers of those products and services are doing equally the same to analyze your interaction and how you utilize our services. I'm trying to find new ways of how we can entice you to either stay as an existing customer or entice you as a new customer. So my parting thought to you is look at this in the conventional sense that it's still just about data, and how do I get a data-driven enterprise to provide data-driven outcome? Because that's how we're educating our customer base.
Great. And just one final reminder, and David, once again, thank you again for participating in today's call. It was very informative. I would like to also remind people our next call is on June the 11th. Focuses IoT and Industry 4.0, European perspectives, examples, and business models. So Niels Hirschberg from SAP on that, and Otto Schnell from DSAG, so that should be very good. As well as we have one coming next week on June the 16th with OSIsoft. They'll really give a good perspective around this whole area that David talked about, around this whole IoT, OT area, and really how it fits into the SAP side as well going forward. Megan, any closing words?
No closing words, just thanking everyone for joining the webcast today. Thank you for coordinating this call, and thank you for presenting, David. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I'll end the webcast now. I'll post everything onto aseg.com as well as email out all attendees. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.